to bring peace, but a sword. And if we're not careful, if we read that line too quickly, we might walk away with a strange picture of Jesus, sword in hand, stirring up trouble, dividing families and communities just for the sake of it. Let's not rush to judgment this morning. Let's slow down and ask a simple but important question. Who was actually holding the sword? Because when we read the whole of Matthew 10, when we sit with the full sweep of what Jesus was saying to his disciples as he sent them out into the world, we begin to see something quite different. Jesus was not the one drawing a sword. Jesus was the one walking through the world with love, with compassion, with truth, with healing. And it was that very love, that very way of being in the world that caused others to reach for their swords. Think about it. What did Jesus actually do that got him into trouble? He healed people on the wrong day. He ate with the wrong people. He told the truth to powerful people who didn't want to hear it. He welcomed those whom society had pushed into the margins. He spoke of a kingdom where the last would be first and the first would be last. And that way of living, that way of loving, disrupted the influence and the privilege of people who had a great deal to lose. The sword in this passage was not in Jesus' hand. The sword belonged to those who felt threatened by his way of love. And Jesus, knowing full well the cost of his own faithfulness, turned to his disciples as he turns to us and said, "If this is what they did to me, don't be surprised when they do it to you too." This was not a threat. This was an honest pastoral warning from someone who loves us enough to tell us the truth. Earlier in Matthew's gospel, Jesus named something that I think is critically important for us to understand. He said they had called the master of this house Beelzebub, which is to say, they have taken the most loving, truth-telling, compassionate person who ever walked this earth, and they have labeled him as evil. They've taken truth and tried to make it sound like falsehood. They've taken goodness and tried to spin it into something sinister. Jesus was describing a game, a very old and very dysfunctional game that the world plays with power and privilege when those things feel threatened. And the rules of the game go something like this. When someone lives in a way that disrupts the status quo, when someone speaks a truth that the powerful would rather keep hidden, when someone extends welcome and dignity to those whom society has written off, the game is to discredit them, to distort their words, to question their motives, to make the person look dangerous, unstable, or extreme. We see this game played out every single day, and perhaps nowhere more visibly than on social media. You may have witnessed this yourself, or perhaps heard about it through your children or your grandchildren. Someone posts something honest, maybe or maybe a word of compassion for a group that's being mistreated. And within hours, and sometimes it's even within minutes, the pile-on begins. The comments flood in, twisting the words, misrepresenting what they said, attaching labels to them that have nothing to do with who they actually are. The mob grows louder, and the original voice, the truthful, compassionate voice, gets buried under a mountain of noise and hostility. That is the game. And Jesus, 2,000 years ago, was already describing it. He was telling his disciples, I know how this works. I've experienced it myself. They will take everything good that you do and try to spin it into something ugly. Do not let that surprise you. And more than that, do not let that silence you. Because, as Jesus said in verse 26, nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. The truth has a way of surviving. God sees to that. The dysfunctional patterns of this world, the patterns of power protecting itself, of privilege defending its turf, of falsehood shouting down truth, these patterns are real, and they are as present in our small rural communities as they are anywhere else. We are not immune to them, but we are not without wisdom about them either. Jesus named the game so that we could recognize it when we see it. In verse 24, Jesus said, a disciple is not above the teacher, nor a slave above the master. And he said it matter-of-factly, almost gently, as if he knew that this would be a hard word to receive. But Jesus tells us this: if you choose to follow me, if you choose to live the way I live, with honesty, with compassion, with a willingness to welcome those that the world pushes away, then what happened to me in some form will happen to you too. You will be misunderstood. You will be misrepresented. There will be moments when your faithfulness, when your compassion are labeled weakness, and when your speaking of truth is called divisive or disruptive. And here's the thing that I want us to remember. That disruption, that division, is not a sign that we have failed as disciples. It may actually be a sign that we are doing something right. We live in a world that often tells us that if we're just nice enough, quiet enough, careful enough, we can keep everybody happy and avoid any real conflict. And there is something in us, something good even, that longs for peace, that longs for community, that longs for harmony. But Jesus is honest with us this morning. He says that genuine faithfulness, genuine kingdom living, will sometimes produce conflict. Not because we're looking for a fight, but because truth and love are inherently disruptive to systems that depend on falsehood and indifference. The families divided in this text were not divided because Jesus wanted to tear them apart. They were divided because when one member of a family chooses a different way, one that's more just, more compassionate, more truthful. It holds a mirror up to everyone else, and they don't want to look in that mirror. So if you've ever felt the sting of being misunderstood because of your faith, if you've ever been labeled or dismissed because you stood with someone that the world was busy dismissing, if you have ever spoken a truth that someone with power would rather not have spoken, hear Jesus this morning. You're in good company. You are walking the same road he walked. And that road, as costly as it sometimes feels, is the road that leads to life. And then, right in the middle of all of this honest, sobering teaching about the cost of discipleship, Jesus paused. And he told, and he tells us as well, something so tender, so intimate, so quietly stunning that it almost takes your breath away. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. Do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. Do not be afraid. In a passage that has spoken honestly about hatred, about division, about being brought before authorities, about carrying a cross, Jesus lands here. Do not be afraid. Not just because the hard things are not real, not because the cost of faithfulness is imaginary, not because the pylons will not sting or the misrepresentations will not hurt, but because in the middle of it, in the middle of every difficult moment, every hostile comment, every time truth gets twisted and we wonder if it is even worth it, God sees us. God sees the sparrow, that small, ordinary, largely unnoticed bird that the market sells 2 for a penny. God sees it when it falls. And if that is true of the sparrow, Jesus says, then imagine how true it is for us. The hairs on our heads are counted. That's an almost absurdly intimate image. It is the image of someone who is paying close, very loving attention. Not a distant God who sat in the universe, set the universe in motion, and then stepped back and watched. It's a God who is close, close enough to count what most of us consider uncountable, close enough to see the moments that no one else sees. That is the God we follow. That is the God in whose name we go out into the world with love and truth and compassion, even when the world pushes back. We do not go alone. We go held. So this morning, I want to leave you with this. You are going to encounter the dysfunctional patterns of this world. You already have. You know what it feels like when truth is spun into something unrecognizable, when goodness is labeled as dangerous, when the simple act of loving the wrong people or speaking an inconvenient truth lands you in someone's crossfire. crosshairs. You know the weariness of it. Jesus knew it too. He did not pretend it was easy. He did not offer his disciples a religion that promised comfort and smooth roads and universal approval. He offered them himself, his example, his way, his truth. And then he offered his disciples this: the unshakable assurance that the God who made them, the God who called them, the God who sent them, sees them, knows them, and holds them. You are not a number in a crowd. You are not a face in the masses. You are someone whose hairs are counted, whose moments are witnessed, whose courage, even in the quiet, unspectacular courage of just keeping on, is not lost on the one who matters the most. When the noise of the world gets loud, when the game gets exhausting, when you wonder if faithfulness is worth the cost, go back to verse 31. Come back to those words that Jesus spoke, not as a distant theological proposition, but as a personal pastoral word of grace. Do not be afraid. You are of more value